So Dr. Emden, thank you so much for the comments, and a couple of points that I took from your comments is that we need to meet the children where they are and dive into actually where they are, but also let the children have some ownership of the teaching and learning as well. And when my final comments during your introduction was to say that I was looking forward to seeing you live, and I will say you were definitely live. Thank you so much. To continue the discussion, we have an esteemed panel, and I'd like to introduce them, and please come up and take your seat at the table as I introduce you. First of all, Dr. Pamela Barnett, Dean of College of Arts and Sciences at Trinity Washington University in Washington, D.C. David Hardy, co-founder and CEO of Boys Latin, the Philadelphia Charter School. And I'm really excited to introduce this next panelist, Gesu graduate, parent of 2 Gesu students, and currently the CEO and principal of Global Leadership Academy Southwest, Tamika Evans. And I now invite to the podium Steve Pilch, head of school at the Shipley School, to serve as our moderator.
So, how many people fell asleep during Chris's presentation? Wow, before we really move in to the panel to talk about it, let me welcome everybody and let me thank Brian and Gesu for having us here. If you don't know Gesu, you need to get to know it. It's just a spectacular, spectacular place, committed to its mission, and actually committed to doing a lot of the things that Chris already referred to. So, having had the privilege to watch the kids, and I think Chris will tell you, they're the ones who tell the story. Find some time to come here when school's in session. Visit the classrooms, spend time talking with the students, spend time with the teachers. You'll see that partnership that Chris is talking about and the commitment to get better. The neatest thing about being part of this community, I think, Bri, is that as long as we're trying to do as much as we can for and with our students, is the commitment to trying to do it for everyone. So I thank you for hosting this wonderful symposium today to help all of us better understand urban education and to do the things that we all think, doing them together, that can make a difference. Would you give Gesu a round of applause, please? As you were introducing the people, and I have the privilege of knowing a little bit more about this panel, and you've all met Chris a little bit, what I'd love to do to start, is starting with David in the end, is to ask each of them to just say a little bit about themselves, something you might like to remember, and then to take a minute or two and comment either on what they heard from Chris and or some other tidbit that might be helpful to us as we deal with the challenges in an effort to improve urban education. Would you mind starting?
Okay. I'm David Hardy. I'm from Boys Latin Charter School. We're the only all-male charter school in the state where you go from grades 6 through 12. And we believe we send more African-American boys to college than any school in the Delaware Valley. What I thought was very interesting today was the whole idea of telling kids that it's okay to be from this neighborhood, it's okay, your life is okay, but it can be better. But you have to validate them as human beings before you even get a chance to teach them. And, you know, we always talk about the things that we bring into the neighborhood, but I think that anybody who's taught in the inner city understands that you learn a lot about that neighborhood and about yourself in working with inner city children. So if you don't learn that, you're not going to be successful. And I'm glad to see good Dr. has found that out and has been able to articulate that in a meaningful way.
And I think if we were adding to that, Chris would tell you that wherever you're from, it's important to take great pride in it and have a commitment to understand our strengths and our challenges, and
Absolutely.
a commitment to make it better, whatever that is.
That's true.
It was great. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamika Evans. I am the CEO Principal of Global Leadership Academy Charter School. I have been a principal there for the last 10 years. And this year we had the opportunity to serve one of the Renaissance schools here in Philadelphia. So this is my first year transitioning from Global Leadership Academy West to Global Leadership Academy Southwest. I am a proud alumni of Gesu School, class of 1992, I believe, and I am an even prouder parent of two scholars that go here to the Gesu School. I am a product of North Philadelphia, and I choose to keep my children in a school in North Philadelphia. I believe that this school itself shows everything that this book represents, and in reading the book, all of the things that I've noticed, even about the cosmopolitan classroom and what we're looking at and what we're looking for out of our teachers. When I'm an administrator, so each and every day I'm looking at teacher practices and what's going on in classrooms. And so when I walk into a classroom, if relationship hasn't been built before anything else, academic rigor cannot be done. And so when I look at what I'm looking for out of teachers and scholars, I'm looking to see whether or not a teacher has built relationship, whether or not she's gone to a home, whether or not they visited the community, whether or not they could see greatness in the children that we serve each and every day. And so for me, this whole cosmopolitan classroom and what we're looking at with that, I'm really, I'm just excited about everything that was in the book. I thank you, Dr. Emden, for what you wrote, and I'm excited to see the transformation not only in the Gesu teachers, but in our teachers as well. So as an administrator, taking this back to help professionally develop our teachers as well. So thank you.
So I'm Pamela Barnett, and I am the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Trinity Washington University in DC. And Trinity has, I think, very important and special mission. It is a small liberal arts women's college, one of the last ones standing. And it is a school that started to provide access to higher education for white Catholic women. Catholic didn't accept white women, Georgetown didn't accept women, so the nuns started this school. And it's a school that around in the 1980s was starting to die, as a lot of women's colleges were. And the president said, you know, we need to go back to our mission, and the mission is access. And who needs access now? Who needs access now is the poor women of DC, the Pell Grant eligible, first generation to college women. It's Black and Latino women that we serve. So that's the world, that's what I do. But I did start my career as a professor of English and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina. And as I was listening to Dr. Emden speak, I was just being reminded of how some students, Black students, had to teach me how to be their teacher. And I'll tell more of that story later, but I'm going to tell it now. Yep. So Terrence, I got this job. I had applied to be a professor of American literature, and I got rejected from this position at University of South Carolina. And they said, well, why didn't you apply for the position in English and African American Studies? Down the road, I went down, I got the job. I talked to a mentor about, well, gosh, I wasn't really planning on being the white teacher of Black Studies. How am I going to do this? And I was given like the worst advice possible. I was told, well, you've got a PhD and you know a lot about African American literature and culture, and just go in there and own your authority and you will be fine. And probably, I'm going to say, even it was my first semester, a couple months in, the student turns in a paper and he has a poem on the front of it. And the poem is, it's the first day of Afro 398, and who do I see but a short, black-haired white lady looking at me? Where is she from? Why is she here? I didn't think whites cared about our history. The answer to these questions I did not know. So for now, I will sit back, watch, and go with the flow. And he was telling me, I don't trust you yet. Like, what are you doing here? And I need you to surface the elephant in the room. I need to know that I can trust you, and I also need to know that you're going to respect me and what I'm bringing to the classroom. So that's sort of the beginning of, I didn't know to call it co-generation, but that's what started to happen. He kind of forced it on me though, right? He put it there, and I had to really start to think about serving the effective dimension of teaching, that it wasn't just about content, it wasn't just my expertise, it was about building a relationship with my students, and in this case about building some trust so that we could learn together.
It's also a classic example of where we learn much more from our students than they ever do from us. And that's one of the things that needing to be open to. Now, Chris, at school they prefer not to hear me, so that's good. Chris, though you've had your 30 minutes, I have a hunch that you might have something else you'd like to add before we go into the
You know, I do, and I'm going to try my absolute best to police myself because I'm on a panel with these brilliant people.
Before you go, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, stop me. The one thing I would just say is this, you know, my slides got delayed earlier and then the spirit hit, so I went somewhere else, but you know, the first image on that slide is that over there. So what word do you guys see up there? Who sees good? Who says anything other than good? So what did you guys see? Right? So y'all see this evil wrapped in the good, right? Looking like now, it was there the whole time. And I think to me it's just the one thing I want to say to folks is that good. There's always evil that is lurking in the midst of all folks when you allow ego and hubris to take the first step in the work that you do, especially in education. And so you may have good intentions, but good intentions without addressing the sort of evil underpinnings will always allow that evil to be the most prominent. And I oftentimes do a second experiment. I say, now that you've seen the evil, what do you see first? And now all they see is the evil and don't see the good anymore, right? And it's about recognizing that good intentions without focusing on the stuff within that might allow evil to sort of overcome that will always allow that to be the most prominent thing. And so like, it's a catch-22. It's a dialectical piece of it, and that intentions alone does not do the work, right? That good intentions can actually end up doing violence on young people if unaddressed.
One, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Thank you for that. I have to tell you, when I noticed that the evil was embedded in the good, I thought to myself, here's a Rorschach test and I'm really in trouble. I'm really in trouble. But the point about how the two are integrated and what we do with them is fundamental to good education. It's actually fundamental to everything that we do. At this particular point, it's really a pleasure to open this up to some questions. I'm going to start with one. And the interesting thing so far is everything we have heard talks not just about education in the hood, but education wherever you're talking about. The ability to open yourself to knowing your students and learning from them, developing relationships that make a difference, and understanding the importance of co-teaching the whole piece. It's interesting in the process so far, those of us from more traditional and backgrounds will talk not just about the importance of course, the student-teacher relationship and the education associated with it, but also the role that parents, administrators, and other educators play in the process. And any number of people who have submitted questions want to know as they look at this, and this is for the panel itself, and we'll start with David and work down. What role do parents have in the process, and how do we maximize their involvement in a way that's constructive? And it could be, I know when we get to Pam, that she's going to talk a little bit about the administrative role or teacher role as well. So we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm actually from North Philly too.
Okay.
And there was a guy from my neighborhood who was the shoe shine man at City Hall, and he was illiterate. But he raised 3 children, 2 master's degrees, 1 PhD. Now, he couldn't help them with their homework, so how did he raise all these smart kids? And the whole thing is, they knew what their father wanted of them. They knew what was important to their father, and that was communicated, maybe not even so much in words, but it's in actions. And what it tells me is that, you know, we always talk about parental involvement. Okay, and parental involvement doesn't mean you have to sit there every night, do your homework with the child. You may not be able to. But if you sit there And the child knows that you're there for him, and he has to get the work done. There's a messaging that goes on that probably doesn't need a whole lot of words, but that is very important. When the parent comes up to the school, not just when there's something going on, just to come up and just lay some eyes on their child to make sure everything's going well. Those are messages that the child sees that are very supportive. And this whole idea that parents need to do a lot of things, you know, there's subtle messages that really need to be communicated so that the child knows what school is for, what their role is in school. If we get that, that's the kind of parental support that I find very important. Now, I will say this. We have students, I've been doing this for a while now, and I found, at least at the high school level, that you have supportive parents, and then sometimes you have parents that have their own issues. And one thing I've also been able to do is be able to talk candidly with the student, and students know their situations. And if a student knows that they don't have the support, that they look for at other places. And that's where the school has to step up and step in. And if you can do that, you'll find you make a lot more progress with kids who may not have been students that you thought you could make progress with.
So implicit in what you said is, listen, the parents who are looking to make their kids' lives, quote, perfect, are not necessarily the best educators for kids, quite to the contrary. And that, consistent with what Chris was saying, is that often our best teachers are not necessarily, or don't necessarily have anything to do with the reading or writing. It's the role model that they might be, and the example they set, and the lessons they teach us, sometimes without our ever knowing it.
I actually started out, my first teaching job was a science teacher. I got an English degree. I shouldn't have been there. I was about one chapter ahead of the students. But what I did was I was honest. I said, hey man, we're learning this stuff together. And so in saying that, in exposing myself that I was a little uncertain about the stuff, it made them put more effort in, it made them more patient with me as a teacher, and we actually got a lot of stuff done. Mm-hmm. But you know, part of being a teacher is being able to share your vulnerabilities with students, because they need to know that.
No question, you have to admit that you're fallible. No question. Tamika.
So I think the first thing that we need to do is understand what we are expecting out of our parents. Because do we expect parent involvement, or do we really expect parent engagement? What are we really looking for? Each and every day I hear these statistics that our parents just are not involved. Black and brown children don't have parents that are involved. And that is far from the truth. The parents that send you their children every day are sending you the best that they have. They're not picking and choosing, saying, oh, I'm gonna send you my worst one today, and hopefully it'll be okay. They're sending you the best that they have, and every parent wants the best for their child. Now, they may not know how to actually show that sometimes, and they may not be educated enough to know how to work this system that we have, but these parents are very involved. The question becomes, what are you looking for as far as involvement? Are you expecting parents to show up in the middle of the day for an event? They can't. Are you expecting parents who do not get paid when they're off to show up and be at the school in the middle of the day? They can't. And so when you look at things and you say parents are not here and parents are not engaged and parents are not doing things, it's just not the truth. And I think that part of it is just our own misconception about what that looks like. So do you want your parents to be engaged in homework at night with your scholars so that they understand what's going on? Do you want them engaged when it comes? Now, they may not show up to your PTA meeting, but you say that their child is in a play at the school, and you say that their child is doing something and they're involved in something, you have every parent showing up because they want to support their children. They may not have time to show up to these things that we, quote unquote, think are important, but those things that are important to them are their children. And so I think that for me, parent involvement is very important, parent engagement is very important, but I think that our lens and what that looks like needs to change in order for us to really look at how to get our parents engaged in the learning process with their scholar. Because I'm more concerned about, is there a safe place for them to read at night when they get home? Did you make it so that they're making sure that they're eating and they're doing those things? Not necessarily that you show up to the school every day, or that you're inside of the classroom every day. But the parents who are sending their children are expecting that the teachers do what they need to do in classrooms for that 7 or 8 hours a day.
So what you just offered was the next chapter to Chris's book, which talks about meeting parents where they are and doing much the same thing that he would have suggested for us. It's terrific. Pam.
So I'm working in the higher ed context, and one of the things that I know our students talk about is feeling that when they are leaving their communities and coming to college, and in DC, by the way, this really is, they are leaving their communities and coming to our college. Most of our students are from east of the river, they're in Anacostia, they're in Prince George's County, like lower income neighborhoods, and they're coming to this rapidly gentrifying part of DC. It's like a world away. And the students say they sometimes feel conflicted. You know, I'm leaving my neighborhood, I'm leaving my family, maybe I'm living on campus, about a third of our students do, or I'm making this journey that feels like a journey from one place to another. And I think one thing we want to do is try to create a little more of a continuum so that it doesn't feel like a completely different place. So one thing we try to do is bring parents to the school, and if they can come, and I find that really parents do, we invite them, come to admissions day, come to orientation on the first day, and we have activities for the parents. But one of the things that we have done very intentionally is try to let the parents know that we understand about code switching, actually. So we had this one like mini lesson where the parents and the students go and they see what is it like to be in a Trinity classroom. And one of our teachers teaches a lesson around this idea of 3 ways of speaking English. Some of you might have seen this brilliant TED Talk, and if not, go YouTube, it's amazing.
That's my student, Jamila.
That's your student.
Yeah.
So there you are. And it's just a wonderful TED Talk, and it kind of tells us, the parents, like, we value this, the different kind of voice in this space, and we think of your children as bi or trilingual. We think of you potentially as bi or trilingual and someone who can help them navigate these different places. So we're trying to make, by introducing things that way, it's not just about helping you fill out the FAFSA. And it's not only about kind of telling you, how we're going to support your students. We want them to come into the space and recognize that there's home in that space too, if that makes sense. So we're working on that all the time.
And Chris, I'm sure you have something.
Man, a couple things, man. First of all, y'all are just so brilliant, so thank you for your amazing insight. There are two major things that are missing on a parent conversation. One is that we're not necessarily always talking about parents. You got to talk about the hood generally. And so there might be a young person who does not have a parent who may be as engaged, but there's always somebody in the community that's somebody that matters.
So let me stop you for just 1 second to emphasize that.
Yeah.
When we think about those who play an important role, and parents do, it can be those in the community.
Absolutely.
That are fundamentally important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And schools oftentimes miss that. And I always tell the principals when I sort of consult with them, I say, listen, you want involvement of the community. If the community is involved, the parents are likely to come. Because the parents themselves, and this is very important to note, second thing, are undergoing severe trauma based on their experiences of having to go through a school that did not value them. People talk about PTSD all the time, post-traumatic stress disorder. There's PTSD, other forms. I write in a book about poor teaching in schools disorder. It's a real disorder. I'm serious. Post-Trayvon stress disorder. The inability to have conversations about things that are happening in community. So you're dealing with parents who are forced to send their child to a school even though they had a negative experience in schools like that. So they themselves are scared of school. They themselves are scared of teachers. They're scared of getting a bad message. So you got to treat the student and the parent as though you're trying to treat a traumatic experience. So, when a person goes through a war and they've experienced a trauma, do you know what the military does? They extract them right away from any setting that was traumatic, or extract them right away from any setting that resembles that trauma. What that means then is that you want to have a parental involvement session, you might have to hold that in the community, outside of the confines of the building, because the building triggers a form of trauma.
Well, and when you add to what you're saying, the dimension of the prospect that you have teachers or educators who may not want to be there, which is part of what you're describing, you create a situation where everybody's villainous.
Listen, look, if you were so uncomfortable, you're like, why don't they want to come to the school? I can't understand why they want to come to school. They don't want to come to school. How about you go to the hood? How comfortable are you with having an event in the hood? And then the second thing is, one thing that I think folks just don't understand about the hood, and I don't want to use the hood in sort of pejorative way, but I want to just introduce new ways of thinking about this stuff. Look, the hood will support you in anything that you tell them that you are. So the community, I'll give you a quick example. My wife grew up in Gun Hill in the Bronx, tough area. And from 3 years old, she'd be in the hood, and they'd be like, so what you want to be when you grow up? And she'd say, I'm going to be a doctor. And so the whole neighborhood started calling her Doc from when she was like 3 or 4. So now she's about 14 or 15, and they're having a party on the block, and things are going down, and the toughest, the drug dealers, the gang members, before anything about to go down, they were like, yo, Doc, this ain't for you. You better go upstairs.
Chris, can you do me a favor? This is spectacular, but you're getting close to yelling.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because
The mic.
Because you're getting feedback.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak from here. So, and they would tell her, Doc, go upstairs, because this ain't for you. And they would say nothing to the other kids, because the other kids had implanted an identity that they were about that life. So what the school's responsibility is to get the hood involved and the parent involved is to literally let the community know that these young people are scholars. Like, yo, look, them other kids out there, they might be doing what they do, but these kids right here, they about that education life. Identify a person from the community who you perceive is in charge of all that's negative and invite them to the school. Maybe not the parents first. I've had drug dealers and I've given them a business card, hear me out, that had the name of our school that we started in the Bronx, Marie Curie High School, and it says their name, and it says Community School Liaison.
Forget it.
And that person had never held a business card their whole life. So by virtue of having a business card, they said, oh man, like, I work for the school. You'd be surprised at how these folks who you view as negative use it, and they're now making sure that the kids get to school safely. They're telling the parents, y'all better come to the event. Like, them folks in the school is actually cool. They're not like them other schools. So the methods to get this done has to be very, very different. You know what else we did? I'm gonna stop after this. You know, we had the local pizza shop that we would always hire, because you know, you throw your parties, you always hire the same spot. We actually had a bulletin board in the pizza shop. So the students who hyper-performed in school would get their names on a pizza shop bulletin board, and they could get a discount off their pizza if they were on the list. Y'all follow me? So now the pizza person also understands who the academic kid is, validates them for being academic. So now you transform the nature of the community school relationship, and that actually will pull a parent in, because they're like, oh, this school ain't like some regulars, like my kid in a good school. My kid is doing good, and then they want to come. It's a reframing, and then you said this earlier. You can't get parents to show up if they're only coming for open school night, and open school night always starts with what's wrong. They know what the model is already. So the first time you got to call to come in, don't have an open school night. Have a parent celebration event. Hire a DJ. Y'all think I'm playing? Hire a DJ. And you're just celebrating parents for being parents. Like, you brought a child into this world, you get a medal.
So,
No, y'all think I'm playing?
no, I'm with you.
And then when you get that and they in there, I'm sorry, because I'm writing about parent stuff right now, so it's fresh in my mind. Once you get them in there, then you introduce them to the tour of the school and the parent space. Y'all talk about you want parents in your school and ain't got no parent space.
That's right.
You gotta have an office only for parents.
That's right.
And that office gotta look lit. You gotta have carpet on that joint. You gotta have the TV screen on that joint. You gotta have tea and snacks and crumpets in that joint. So they come in and get celebrated, and they say, whoa, I have a space in this school. You welcome them just because. Like, you bored on a Tuesday, because I know you might be working, and you just need a place to go relax and get free coffee. Come to the school, to the parents' space. And once they're there, what's innate in them gets activated. Because once they're there, now they're like, well, how my kid doing though? Once they're there, let me go see how you doing in class. So all the stuff that we want done can get done. It's just a different method to getting it done.
So, before we get any further, if you haven't bought this book, For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, and the rest of you all too, I hope you will, and I hope you'll buy that next book that we just heard about. It'll be absolutely terrific about parenting and other pieces of it. It will be fabulous. David, I know you wanted to add one more comment to it.
I just did want to piggyback on what the good doctor said. Listen, we have schools in this city where parents are almost unwelcome. I mean, they walk in these schools, they can feel right away, and nobody likes them. They don't like your children. Why are you here? You're a pain in the butt. And that's what they come into your school with. So if you get a parent, certainly in this city, you get a parent who comes in here with a bad attitude,
You're gonna get it.
don't think that they didn't earn that bad attitude. That's not a well-deserved bad attitude. Somebody gave them that attitude.
Word.
So it's your job first to kind of take that, get that off them, shed that. This is a new place, and we're going to work differently here. You got to convince them of that, because they've had, people are subjects of their own experiences, and the experiences that a lot of people have in schools in the city are terrible. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, open it up. Don't be afraid to go to their houses. I used to work in what was the worst murderous square mile in Pennsylvania. And I used to walk around that neighborhood all the time without fear, because the neighbors knew me and they knew I was there to educate their kids, and they watched out for me. You know, I could go to people's houses at night. If they thought it was dangerous, they would walk me to my car. They took care of me because I was taking care of their kids.
Word.
And that means something. So if you have a relationship, look, I don't know any school, whether it's in the city, the suburbs, in Kansas, or anywhere else. I don't know any school that works where the parents don't have a say. I don't know. You can't have a good school without the parents having a say. And that's also in a low-income neighborhood where you think they might not deserve a say.
Yes,
If they don't have a say, it's not going to be a good school.
So, in that regard, as we address the questions around parenting and administrators, first thing we learned is, let's look at the word parent much more globally than we think of it. It isn't simply about the person directly necessary, parent or guardian job, but those who play a role of significance in helping within any community really are parental in nature. And we need to find a way to access and engage them in the manner that I just heard at the far end. And then the second thing is, we probably all need to get outside of our own background and natural predisposition to define what the appropriate role is of a parent, and understand that the appropriate role is going to be defined by the people you're working with who want to make a difference in the kids' heads, and those are their parents accordingly. So, questions out in the audience, there have to be some.
Thank you so much. Chris, I just spent a week at an educational technology conference, and when I saw good and evil really resonated with me. I was wondering your thoughts just on sort of the potential for positive engagement around the explosion of the use of technology with young people, and some of the potential for negatives in terms of student agency.
It's a brilliant question. I get this quite often. I think that technology is a wonderful thing. I think that the issues around the tech divide need to be bridged. I think that technology at the same time could be the worst thing of all time, because it's oftentimes used as an excuse to be able to mask inequities, right? So genuinely, true story, I went to California 2 years ago to work on a school district that got a huge grant from the government to improve educational outcomes. I talked about the importance of pedagogy. They nodded and like they agreed. And then a guy said, but we got to bridge the tech divide. Let's give everybody in the school district iPads, computers in every home. And the reason why they did it was because they had this huge grant. And what I was saying was not expensive enough. They needed to be able to spend money and spend money quickly so they could get the grant for the next iteration. So they decided to buy all this stuff and give to these communities. No one was trained how to use them, etc. And what happened when I went back 4 years later? I wasn't even going to go, but because I was so upset, I went back. He had all these graphs and charts and bells and whistles, and he said the last line of his conversation was, isn't it unfortunate that after our investment in X amount of millions of dollars, they showed no improvement? And that's what technology oftentimes does. It becomes the provision of the technology without focusing on the pedagogy, and then it just becomes an expensive problem. Now, technology can enhance instruction. I think access, right now I can access whatever I want on Google about whatever it is I need. That is so powerful. But we don't allow cell phones in most classrooms. But this can be used as a tool, but it could also be used as a bad thing. If I allow the young people if the kid wants to learn and they want to learn more about what I'm doing, they can have access to it. Or it can be a tool to distract them. But if the pedagogy works, it's an attribute. If the fundamental pieces are flawed, it becomes another reason why we can justify why things ain't working, and by blaming the young people for why it ain't working.
So in that regard, Chris, just as you said in your speech, the issue here wasn't the kids.
At all. It's never, look, it ain't never look, and I think there's some, look, I'm not saying that there aren't instances where you're gonna engage with someone who's gonna be like, nope, I ain't learning, whatever. Like, that may happen. It is by no means the norm. And it's such a small minority of the larger population, but if you had these folks tell it, everybody like that. And it's just not real. Just really quickly while we're on tech real quick, I also think that social media and the technology world is that, so people are like, why are you always talking about @Chris Emden? Why are you talking about #HipHopEd? Because the best professional development that I've seen in the last 5 years exists on Twitter. Hashtags around EdChat, hashtag around SpedChat, our hashtag on HipHopEd, and people are really engaging and connecting. So for me, technology, to be able to allow folks to be able to connect around a theme and learn from each other has been amazing. Every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I haven't missed a Tuesday yet in 6 years. I'm online with a community of people under the hashtag HipHopEd, and literally educators, parents, students, professionals, policymakers converge and have conversations about how we can make education better. If there were no Twitter, we wouldn't have it. So it can be a tool for good, but if we don't focus on the core things, it can be evil.
So in that context, let me ask you, from your perspective, the role of technology in your school and/or that you think it can be most productive.
So the role of technology, I think you just said it, Doc, when you said that most schools don't allow cell phones because of other things, because scholars are taking pictures of things or using it and not using it appropriately. I think the first thing is, are we having courageous conversations about how to effectively use technology? Are we teaching scholars about what they need to do in regards to, because it's not that they can't use it effectively. We do an amnesty period where we say, okay, this is your amnesty period, you're supposed to turn in your cell phone. If they choose not to, they choose not to. But then I have 2 classrooms that are technology immersion classrooms that use cell phones all day long because the scholars are using them to get great work done. And so when you think about, can that happen school-wide with all 600 or 700 scholars? It can. But the question becomes, do you have a teacher that is willing to understand how to do this, also be able to have a teacher that has enough management to be able to manage what's going on in the classroom, and then also a teacher who is open-minded enough to know that I can actually use this as a tool so that I can get the best results. Because right now, honestly, no level of curriculum coming into school is teaching us what we need to know or teaching our scholars what they need to know. No books are, so they need to be on Google. They need to access what's going on out there. So for us, that immersion is really important. I just think that it comes with a level of control that has to be there in order to make sure that it's used effectively. But if we just totally say, no cell phones allowed, no technology allowed, last week, Scholar, FaceTiming, Dr. Booker is our executive director. We have iPads. They're FaceTiming Dr. Booker on the iPad. And so she calls me on my cell phone and said, I have a scholar FaceTiming me on the iPad. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how did they do that? And now we're trying to figure out how they did it. And but because she's connected through the contacts, they're FaceTiming her on the iPads. Does that mean take the iPad? No. That means for us, they're smarter than us. They know more than us. They're more savvy than us. So now I need to figure out how they continue to get around what we put in place. So that's what we are.
And all the more reason, by the way,
Yeah.
if we go back to Chris's presentation and the importance of co-teaching and utilizing them, who do know. The students know
They're
much more
savvy
than
than
we
us.
do. Wow.
Man, I gotta say this real quick, I'm sorry, but it's really important and I'm gonna forget it if not. You know, one thing that I've seen also that's important is for us to have classes on the appropriate use of those tools.
Right.
And appropriate, like you have to have a social, you want to be college and career ready? That's the career and that's the world. Because one thing that's always getting me now is young people not understanding their digital footprint.
Right.
And they don't even know what that means. They're not having conversations about it. If you want to prepare them for the real world, you got to prepare them for what your name is attached to on those spaces. How do you use that appropriately? Who are you following? What community? But the thing is, you can't ignore the problem.
Right.
You can't act like it doesn't exist. You have to be able to understand what the landscape is and then develop mechanisms to be able to help them to be able to navigate it appropriately. So with use of technology, if educators had social media classes or digital classes on how to appropriately use those spaces, there could actually be benefits.
And by the way,
We're not scared of it.
by the way, though the classes are important, it's not a one-time class.
Oh,
It's
no.
ongoing
Right.
and important.
Right.
Next question. Let's go, yeah, go ahead. Let's go back there,
Sorry.
okay? Could you direct it to me so we can then, if that would be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Julissa Anderson. I'm a public ally, which is an AmeriCorps program. And I had a question specifically for the good Dr. Emden. Earlier you
So
talked...
much for directing it to me.
I
It's
know.
okay.
Well, I'm directing it to you, but it's really kind of for him. And really everyone.
We're trying to, it's okay, go ahead.
Only because earlier he referenced some kind of community-based asset development, and I just was curious how really everyone thinks we can make this more accessible, and ultimately like how we can make this more practiced throughout society without it being something that's stigmatized and like a little uncomfortable for people that are not from the hood. I mean, I want our girls to go out there and get those things from our people in the community, but I just want to know how we can make that more acceptable.
So it's a terrific question, and it's a good one for Chris to begin with, but I know it's one that everyone at the table has an opinion on.
Definitely.
So we'll try to do it as quickly as we can, but effectively, so. You want
You want me to jump in?
to finish up,
Yeah,
Chris?
look, to me, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying you're going to let everybody else
you
in.
go
The
first.
chief way to be able to introduce this idea of multiple identities is to have those of us who are older folks actually be real folks. I know it sounds crazy, but some of y'all right now, if your friends saw you in this room right now, they would think you were a fraud because you loud and you be turning up and you be kicking it or you telling a joke and you can't sit down for 5 minutes. And I think the chief way to be able to model being authentically yourself in academic is to do exactly that. And a lot of us have learned to police ourselves. Like we've learned to be complicit by doing violence on ourselves. Jeez, man.
Why don't we come back to Chris, right?
Yeah.
Would that be all right? Anybody else on here?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. It's about being a teacher, and bringing your authentic self to the classroom.
Well, and outside of just the teachers that are, I'm sorry. And outside of the teachers that like degree-wise are teachers, I mean like the people that are in our communities that are really assets to our students and our scholars, but don't seem that way in the eyes of society because they may not have that degree or have that experience like as a teacher.
Yeah.
Right, which is, Dr. Emden gave such good examples of that, I think, in his talk, but how do you kind of honor that? And by the way, this is really like getting my mind going about, oh wow, like maybe we really need to like spend more time like in Anacostia instead of asking everyone to come to us and think about how to like utilize some of the people that are in the communities, for our educational mission. So this is like, I'm learning as I stand here. But I do know that one of the things we're trying to do, or that I think it's really important to do as an educator, is have a curriculum that, listen, we're delivering some content, right? But to have a curriculum that is built on what the students are bringing to the class. So I was actually thinking about the technology question. And one of the things that I think has become important is thinking of different ways of assessing student learning. And one way to do that is to ask the students to bring things from their communities or their lives to the classroom. Sometimes it's like with video, sometimes it's like through taking an oral history, sometimes it's by putting together some kind of collage or bringing artifacts from their communities. But I think some of our most successful teachers are ones who are finding ways to like honor what people know in their own communities, but bring that in and make connections between the course content, like our theory, and their practical lived experience. And I feel like technology is a great way of doing that. You could write a paper about that, but it doesn't capture voice in quite the same way that what you can do with an iPhone can do. And I think that's just good pedagogy, but I think it's also one, so you're like helping students like make application of more theoretical concepts, but you're also like honoring the voices that the students are coming from and learning from them, right? Because I can't bring that to the classroom, right? I can maybe bring the theory, I can like bring the reading, but they're going to be the one to make that connection. Like, hey, on the subway, that's the better metaphor for us in this case.
Tamika, do you want to add something?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it goes back to building relationships again, because as a teacher, when you start your school year off, how do you build relationship with your scholars? So whoever's in your classroom, do you see greatness and value and everything that comes along with them? So do you know who is teaching them gymnastics every Tuesday and Thursday night? Do you know what basketball team that they're a part of? Do you know where they are, what community center is around them? Because the gymnastics coach is important to them. The basketball coach is important to them. So can you figure out who it is that's impacting their life on a daily basis and bring those people into your classroom, bring those people into the space because they can teach better lessons than we can any day. So every time you find a scholar in your classroom or they come into your space, you should find greatness in every part of their life. So if I don't introduce myself from the start of the year and I don't find out what are those other things that you do outside of just show up to Global Leadership Academy every day or outside of just showing up to Gesu or whatever school it is every day, then that's a problem. So the way that we can get people involved that don't seem like they're part of the school, quote unquote, kind of society type thing, is we've created this circle of people that is only, these are the only ones that really have a space in here. But really, this is the problem, is that we've created this kind of discord that you're out, as you stated earlier. I don't even make it comfortable for them to come in. So do I make it comfortable for the person who is the hairstylist at the corner of the block to come into the schools and to make sure the only time we really invite you in is when we do career week. And then we'll do career day and we'll say, oh, these are great careers, but then we never bring them back into our school setting again at all during the school year. So do we really value what they do each day? So I think that if we build relationships with scholars, figure out exactly who it is that impacts their lives and bring those people in, I think that is an easy win, is a quick win in how you can do that community piece.
David?
Well, I remember growing up here and going to school and having people who worked at my school who lived in the neighborhood, so we might run into them shopping or they went to our church. So that meant that when I was walking around with my mom and I ran into one of those people, I always was sweating bullets because I knew that was a direct line to all the stuff that I did. So it kept me in check. And what I remembered about that when I got into teaching is I make sure I kind of am visible in our neighborhood. I want people to know I'm going to be around. Even on Saturday, I might come to somebody's game or hang out at the rec centers. I want them to know that I'm accessible because that gives me a direct line. You know, if all the parent knows is what the kid comes home and tells them about you, that's not going to be a good story. Just like you don't want to hear all the stuff they come to school and tell you about their parent. That's not the truth. You got to have a direct line, and you only get that by being around, being in proximity with these people, being able to have relationships with these parents. And what happens is if you get a relationship with one parent, they're going to tell another parent. We have a parent here. Is she still here? Is Miss Crummy still here? She just left? Okay, because Miss Crummy was one who kind of knew how to work everybody at our church. She had a son at our school, and she knew how to make connections with other parents. And you know, once people know how you are, that word gets around. But you have to make an effort to do it, and it's not going to be a simple effort. You got to really put yourself out there a little bit.
Yeah.
So in that context, we've heard that the most important and best teachers in our students' lives may or may not necessarily be in the academic classroom. And if they are in the academic classroom, the most important lessons they teach may not necessarily be about the subject matter at hand. And most importantly, remembering, just as we heard with the parent piece, our involvement in the community is as important as the community's involvement with us.
Can I say one other thing? You know, if you want to see how somebody really knows how to work young kids, watch these drug dealers. You watch how they get these kids on. First of all, they're going to come talk to them about nothing about drugs. It's going to be about basketball, where'd you get those sneaks, video games. They start a relationship. You know, we want to deal with kids and we don't want to start a relationship. You know, if you go to a sales training class, the first thing they tell you about sales is establish rapport. You have to do that anywhere. Now, we don't want to do that with kids because, you know, we're too busy. Well, no, that's not the way it works.
Relationships matter. Next question.
Hi, my name's Emily. I come from the Barnes Foundation, which is an art institution. And I'm wondering, what role do you think that art institutions and museums can play in kind of aiding all of these amazing efforts that I'm hearing you guys talk about?
Did people hear the question?
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Well, how do you utilize the art institutions?
Art institutions?
Yeah.
How do you utilize art institutions in the process?
Right.
For educating?
Well, I always just say that, I mean, they're integral. So I do a project, I've done it for five or 6 years now, called Science Genius. So beyond art institutions, artists. So what Science Genius is, it's a rap battle, but it's a science rap battle. So students in schools have to write science raps around their academic content. It's a very rigorous rubric. What you'll find is they'll be like, well, I can't write about no science. They ain't got nothing to do with hip hop. And I'm like, oh, you whack. You can't even spit about no science. Then you get them motivated. And then you have a really rigorous rubric. Point of your thing is, at the end of it, they battle. There's a final winner. And the event is always at a major art institution that is outside of the community. And because first of all, they just don't go to those institutions. So you need folks in those institutions to give your space. If you tell a school that you can hold your event in my space, they will form partnerships with you and you go forward. See, everybody wants folks to be getting along, but don't nobody want to reach out to the folks you want to get along with. You know what I mean? So you got to say, listen, we're offering out our space. If you have any venues, events, or competitions, you can use our space. You form a connection right there. So Science Genius has been at the Intrepid Museum. It's been at the Museum of Natural History. And so those spaces, the venues alone, become really prominent. So that's number one. Number two, you cannot have an art institution without having an educational outreach person that you pay, because, you know, institutions will hold value for a lot of things. Like, oh, we want connections with the community, and you ain't paying somebody to be an educational liaison. So somebody has to be the person whose sole role is to make connections with the institutions and then share resources. And if you can do those things, then the institutions play a huge role.
Anybody else? You okay? Next question. Where are we?
Thanks for coming. If I could, I just want to thank Ms. Evans for constantly calling the kids scholars. I think the use of words is so important, and I appreciate that very much. My question is primarily for the K-12 folks, and it's, I'm curious as to how often, how frequently institutes of higher ed ask you what kinds of teachers you need and what kind of statements you give them if they do, and if they don't, tell me so I can do that.
Great.
Great question.
David, you want to start?
We don't hear a whole lot about that. I'll tell you what we do here. Since we're a Latin school, we get all the Latin student teachers in the Delaware Valley. So they are a little more sensitive to that. But I do think you're right. I think schools of education people who work in schools of education need to get into schools more and to do more things. And I got to tell you, this goes back. In one of the other schools I worked at, we had a guy who was getting his certification. So he had teachers come in and observe his classroom. So the first lady they sent fell asleep in class. Like the kids like that. She's sitting in the back snoring and they're making fun of her, okay? The second guy came and body odor. And a kid came out of class and complained to me that this observer came in and he was stinking up the class. And so I yelled at this boy because I thought he was being rude and disrespectful, and I sent him back to class, and then the guy came out and said goodbye to me, and I know what the kid was complaining about. Okay, we got people who haven't been in a classroom, and don't know how to function in a classroom, haven't done it for 25 years, and they're teaching kids how to go out into this world. That's just wrong. We need more education people coming to school, spending days, not a day, days at schools. Not just one school, multiple schools. Kind of see what the landscape looks like, because I don't think they have a clue. When I see what's coming into to schools now with teaching degrees, they're not getting everything they need. And that's because the people who are preparing them don't have any connection with what's going on in the real world.
Well, and the reality is, sadly, that within many teacher college curriculum, they're very similar to what they were 30 years ago. And I promise you, and I could be wrong about this, I don't think any of them begin to cover the curriculum in the way that Chris has suggested is relevant and important, because content tends to be the emphasis as opposed to necessarily how we're going to do it. And so much of what's really good in the classroom needs to be around the how and the connection with the kids and all of those kinds of things. Anybody else on that?
I think there's also a difference between theory versus practice. The only conversations that really occur is, can we utilize your school for 3 student teachers this year? And can I send over 5 teachers from wherever, because I need them to have practicum experience. But there's no real dialogue with those in the building about what are you looking for out of these student teachers, because they already come with their rubric, they already come with their observation tools already, and they never say, okay, but in this, because GLA may be very different than Boys Latin. The culture in Boys Latin may be very different than the culture in GLA. So when you come in as a student teacher to GLA, I may be looking for something very different in what I'm looking for my teachers to be ready for when they actually come out into the classroom for the first time by themselves. So versus what Mr. Hardy is looking for. So at the end of the day, there's no conversation about what are you looking for before I send a student teacher to your school. It is, this is my observation tool. I come in once every month to view them. I come in for 1 lesson out of the month. I tell them that they did an exemplary job, and then I walk out and we walk away and everything is fine, and then all they're doing is turning in paperwork. And so I just feel like there's no dialogue. There's also no dialogue between the 9 to 12 principals and administrators and CEOs with the college administrators and those that are in this academia, because there's no dialogue about what are you looking for now and looking back on. It's just no dialogue. So I think that in going forward, I think that before tools and observation tools are made, I think they should be tailored to the schools that they're going to. And it's easy to say I'm going to school for urban education and I'm doing it because I'm in this program or I went through that program, and I think that I'm ready to go into this school now because I completed this many years of this program. And you're not ready. You're not ready. And honestly, I don't know that they will be ready based upon the rubrics that they're given. As you stated, it is still 30 years in the making that we're still teaching the same way we did 30 years ago. We're still preparing them the same way we did 30 years ago. Our children are different, our expectations are different, and honestly, our children are brilliant. And so are they ready for the children they're about to receive? And I think the answer is no.
Does any of them ever ask you what your school's about?
No, there's not even a mission.
What's your purpose?
Yeah, what is
mission?
the mission? Because it's very different than a Boys Latin. So what are you expecting for a teacher? Because the idea is that if this student teacher is wonderful, I want to keep you. I want you to actually educate scholars in this building. So then how do I make sure that you understand the culture of this building and what we're looking for? And there's never a dialogue in regards to what that looks like.
Remembering what we heard a little bit earlier, and I appreciate everybody offering this, is our curriculum, by definition, if we're going to do what we're doing, becomes more interdisciplinary and more integrated. Historically, Teachers College has taught people to be the purveyors and conveyors of the knowledge. If you think about what we're talking about, it's not possible for anyone to be an expert in all of the areas we're talking about, and that we're moving much more towards where the teacher needs to play the role of one, co-teaching and facilitating, not necessarily, quote, lecturing, among other things. Other questions?
You gotta tell them cats no, too. You gotta tell them cats no. I don't know what they. You gotta tell them. If they
go ahead.
come in and you don't want to, no.
Is it on? Speak right in. All right, Dr. Emden, this is specifically for you because I'm a person that for the last year and 25 years prior to that was in Camden City. So I hear you talking about the hood, the hood, the hood. And yes, I've been in the hood teaching and administrator and dropout prevention and culture and climate leader, assistant principal before I came to what doesn't seem like the hood at all to me is West Catholic Preparatory High School. And I arrived there this year and thinking, well, where's the hood? And it's not in the kids at all. I can't see it, I can't find it. And yet when I go around to the classrooms, I see that in certain classrooms they're talking, which some people consider to be the hood. You know, they're talking too much, you know, or they're laughing too much. And then other classrooms, they're like this. So you've talked about about pedagogy and also about content and knowing your content and how the kids should be involved in lesson planning. I want to know your thoughts on discipline. I'm in charge of discipline as assistant principal, and just what are your thoughts about that, and what can I take back to teachers?
Cool. It's a great question. So the first thing, this feedback is crazy. Y'all hear me? Yes. I gotta, yeah. Still hear me? All right.
Have you got your thing still on?
I don't know. This must be on. Is it on?
I think it's still on, that's why.
That makes sense.
Keep going.
So yeah, the first thing I'm about to say about the comment is about the comment about the hood, right? I think the hood is, it's a socially constructed phenomenon, right? So even in this space that we are here, we've heard that we talk. Master know that basic physics and acoustics. We've heard about we heard urban, we've heard inner city, we've heard the hood. We're all talking about the same population in the same spaces. It's really all semantics. It really, really is. So that's the first thing. I like to glorify the term the hood is because when you say that, it's like, it's so colloquial. It's so, it's like, you've been talking about it anyway. You just want to call it urban or inner city. It's the same phenomenon. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is about, the classes where you have the engagement or the this. And the question becomes, are you associating the this with good? And the this with the bad. And so I actually did a research study about a couple weeks ago. The paper should be out soon, where we looked at interactions and transactions in urban classrooms. And here's what was most fascinating. The classrooms where there's the least learning happening, the kids are loud, they're moving with their hands a lot, hand gestures, and they're having a lot of conversations, but they're not talking at all about the content, right? Then the classrooms that administrators identified as the most effective, there was not much noise, it was quiet, the kids were calm, and they were not using gestures at all. And they indicated that those are the classes that they thought were most effective. And those are just classrooms where they were interacting. But then we discovered these transaction classrooms, the idea of social capital and capital exchange and transactions. And the classes where the kids were learning the most, hand gestures, loud, a lot of conversation. The only difference was the types of conversations that were happening. And so literally the most dysfunctional classrooms and the most effective classrooms look exactly the same. And the ones in the middle were just run-of-the-mill classrooms. And so the question becomes, how do we look more closely at what's going on in the classrooms rather than the optics? Because if you're looking at optics alone, it may look like dysfunction when effectiveness is happening. Or you may think things are popping and the conversations are off base. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, folks might not like this, but I don't believe in classroom management. Hear me out. The notion that one human being is going to manage 30 other human beings is senseless. It may work early on, later on, it's an exercise in futility. You may get to the point where you get folks settled, but you're not getting to the point where they're going to be engaged with you. The chief goal is a distributed operation of the classroom space. Right? In that point, everybody can calibrate their behavior or their attentiveness based on the norms that you've established. It's just back to the church. When a preacher is preaching and winks at the organist, and then the organist starts playing high volume, bah, 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 what happens? Everybody knows it's time to catch the Holy Ghost, right? And so grandma ain't ran all week. She gets up, start running up and down the aisles, turning up, right? But the preacher is never concerned with whether or not I can control the congregation enough to get back to my sermon. The preacher just knows, another wink at the organist, now I play more serene music, and as I play more serene music, everybody knows, okay, he about to give a good word. And grandma might be turning up, and as soon as she hears a different music, what she does? She dropped right there. It's like the Holy Ghost left right away. She falls right out on the floor. You might have to get the wig and the blanket. It depends on what church you go to. But she knows automatically that the music has changed, so my behavior must shift to meet the needs of the person delivering the instruction. Same thing with classrooms. If the teacher has established what the rules of engagement are with young people, they will self-police to ensure that the goals are met. Otherwise, they end up playing the role of complicity. And the role of complicity has nothing to do with instruction. I know I'm taking a lot of time, but I got to say one more thing, and I'm going to shut up for the rest of the sermon. I said sermon. I did a study recently with a couple of doc students, and we discovered this thing called the pretty brown girl syndrome. This is probably one of the first times I'm talking about it publicly, but this is real. That you go into urban spaces in particular, and young women of color get higher grades than their male counterparts. They always hyper-perform when compared to their male counterparts. You go back into those schools, and you say, well, they're quiet and they're attentive, and the boys are in the back turning up. You look at the tests, and you say they get higher scores on tests. we started looking closely at the test and started realizing that the instructors were giving the girls better grades based on their behavior and not their understanding of the content. So a teacher would say, the answer's wrong. I'm like, well, I see where she was going. Let me give her some partial credit. The boy comes, it's wrong. And this ends up playing out in the grades that they receive, the comments they receive, and even who is going to be valedictorian. And even when those young women fail the exam, they'll say, well, it's not, if they fail a standardized exam, it's because the test is biased. Because look, she's getting a 90 on all her report card grades. Without a recognition of the fact that we are teaching them, those young women in particular, but also boys who learn complicity, that academic success means being docile, being complicit, don't ask questions, and condition yourself to not be engaged. And we are now paying them for not learning by giving them grades for appropriate behavior rather than understanding content. And let me tell you why this gets dangerous. It gets dangerous because they get into college and university when they're academically challenged for the first time because you've given them good grades for being nice, and they are dropping out at higher rates than any other demographic. And they, excuse me if I'm gonna just be honest, they are also, because they spent their whole entire lives in K-12 education being validated and loved for being nice. Once they don't get that love back when they get to higher education, they go seeking that, look, y'all want me to talk about some real talk, but they go seeking that love and attention in other spaces. We got this demographics of young women of color who go into university and are most likely to be able to make poor decisions once they're in that space because they're looking for the validation that they receive from institutions that never taught them that you are valued for your brain and not for you doing what I want. And so we are now playing out a pedagogy of prostitution. Y'all don't want me to talk, but I'm gonna talk because young people are being paid in grades for doing what teachers want them to do. And what they want them to do is not at all allowing them to be able to be intelligent and question and ask. And if you go into schools in spaces outside of urban spaces, the kid who asks the most questions, the kid who pushes back, the kid who's anti-authoritarian is perceived to be the most intelligent kid. And in our schools, the kid who's most docile, the most attentive and quiet and nice and says, yes, sir, is the one who's perceived as the smartest. And so why is smartness for urban youth complicity and not true engagement?
Thank you. So, by the way, contextually, two things. One, as you talked about setting the guidelines within the classroom. Implicit in that, of course, is if you're developing relationships with those kids, they hear those guidelines and are able to respond as they go. We're going to go one more question. Let me explain where we're going to go.
I'd like to jump in here for a moment. So first of all, I see this all the time. The young woman who has been, and we serve all young women of color, who has been rewarded for her obedience more than taking risks, more than asking questions, more than kind of making us hear her voice. So we're trying to teach that. But I'm actually interested in the student who's not just asking questions, who's being truly disruptive, disrespectful, really is a disciplinary issue. And that is, I never hear one of those without saying, I've got a faculty development issue here. That behavior is usually telling me something about how they're perceiving the classroom. Usually they're feeling disrespected or they're not being engaged, that there's something going on in the classroom. So yes, I'll try to help the student think about what are the classroom norms, but I also need to help the professor. How do we establish those norms as a community? How do I engage that student so that that student doesn't want to be defiant or disengaged or falling asleep or talking back? It's always, in some ways, it's a two-sided question, and I always go to faculty development as part of the answer.
And it's important that we understand that we set, without ever even knowing it, the guidelines for what's going to happen by our expectations. And when we do what you've talked about, we've undermined the whole process, and most importantly, our kids. One last question, let me explain, and then each of our four panelists will take 30 seconds with a final comment. So, one last question.
Hi, thank you.
Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, because this has been just beautiful, and the hope and love in this room is really inspiring. I want to ask this idea of community, like what happens when these communities aren't one community? Like in Philly, often that's geographic, but sometimes it's racial, sometimes it's many others. And I teach at a high school, so there's a lot of versions of that come to be. I know at other schools, it's the same neighborhood, and so there's a lot more sameness. But can you talk about what community means when it's a bunch of communities that sometimes don't even get along?
Okay, can we do that? David, you want to take a quick?
Yeah. My belief is that community is what everybody in the building kind of says they want to do. It's our agreement on how we're going to conduct ourselves. And that should be true no matter where you come from, no matter what your background is. We feel like if you come in our school and put our blazer on, you're one of our guys and you got to act our way. And I think that's, in most good schools, they have their own school culture. And that's irrespective of what the neighborhood culture is or the city culture is. You do what you want. That's what makes it work.
So as you find a way to strengthen your own area to develop that sense of community, you have a way of beginning to deal with those things. So let's do this quickly. If you wouldn't mind starting, David, we'll go 30 seconds for a last thought. Tamika, PM, and then...
Well, I'm just glad to have been here today. I think the doctor is hit on something really good. Anything that's going to help education nowadays has to be disruptive. We have this old, stodgy educational system that needs to have the doors kicked in and the windows broken, and we need to do things differently. And to see him come in here with this energy and this passion to talk about this, and I know you heard some good things today, I think this is what has to happen, not just in urban education, in all education.
Well said. Tamika?
I am just grateful to have had the opportunity to be here today. I would like to just end by saying that I think it's our job to inspire, it's our job to engage, it's our job to motivate. But I think that as educators, as administrators, we have to figure out how to go from being on a high and being at a 10 and being motivated to actually seeing practice change in our classrooms. Because even from purchasing a book and trying to do the turnaround training and trying to do this, what does this look like? And how do we make sure that we're inspecting things and that we're monitoring what's going on so that we can make sure that these things are resonating throughout everything that we're doing, and we're not just on a high because of motivation, but we're actually seeing it transform in our classrooms. And I'm really excited because I think that the book has given me a new vigor, and I'm excited about what to do differently, but also in regards to even my own children as a parent and what I'm looking for out of classrooms that they're sitting in, because I'm looking for those same things sitting here as a parent of what I'm expecting my teachers to do, and the same level of engagement that I'm expecting. I should not expect any less for mine that I would give to somebody else's. So at this point, I'm kind of looking from a parent lens as well in regards to what this classroom should look like, how my scholars should be engaged, and what that needs to look like going forward.
And how we do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Great. Pam?
I'd like to end by reflecting on the title of the book for a moment. So for all the white teachers teaching in the hood, and I think as an administrator, and how many of you in here are academic leaders, principals, run departments, work in higher ed? On the one hand, I think it's so important to be helping those white teachers who do want to serve in these spaces learn lessons like those that Dr. Edmond is sharing with us, really become teachers that are appropriate for those students. And that means those students being willing to reflect on their bias, being willing to name the elephant in the room, being willing to be uncomfortable when they have to talk about their whiteness in those spaces, being willing to ask for the students' trust by being a little bit vulnerable. So on the one hand, for all the white teachers, but then all the rest of y'all, I, as administrator, take it really seriously. How do I create spaces that are as comfortable for my teachers of color as for my students of color? One thing I can tell you in higher ed, I don't know if it's true in K through 12, but it's not just an issue of recruiting teachers of color, it's retaining. There is a revolving door of faculty who do not feel comfortable in the space, they're not getting mentors, maybe the way they're approaching their teaching or their scholarship is not being valued, it's looking unconventional. If we're gonna solve this problem, it seems to me one thing we have to do is not just, and I'll work on the pipeline of bringing you more teachers of color, but we also need to make the schools very comfortable spaces for those teachers as well.
Three quick things. The first thing is just my deep appreciation for the invitation to be here and to be on this panel with these brilliant people. And I don't say brilliant loosely. I've been on panels and I'm like, man, who they got on this panel? And but these are just brilliant folks with such keen insight. And I'm just, to you guys personally, deeply appreciative and honored to be on a panel with you. That's number one. Number two, a lot of folks in this room are white folks, you know what I mean? And I always try to be sensitive to the feeling that folks get when the book title says your name, and it's sometimes it's uncomfortable. And I want to just say that I acknowledge the discomfort, and it is analogous to the discomfort of those young folks. And it's not said and named to offend, is said and named to inform. We need white folks in the hood because we need teachers, damn it. And so if you happen to be white, that's folk. And we need allies. And so you're not demonized, you are loved, and we want to inform your practice to be better. And then the third thing is that, listen, y'all, education, specifically urban education, is the civil rights issue of our time. No way around it. And if you recognize that it's a civil rights issue, and you are a teacher in the classroom or an administrator in a university, or you are somebody who's doing work connected to education and the civil rights issue of our time, you must approach improving this work with the same kind of ethos and fervor as the folks before us did in the larger civil rights issue. You cannot do civil rights work by not pushing boundaries. You cannot do civil rights work by being quiet. You cannot do civil rights work by not challenging. If you acknowledge that it's a civil rights issue of our time, you must then acknowledge that in doing this work, you have to approach it like an activist. And so all of y'all, one thing I want you to leave here saying is that I am an activist. I am an activist. I am an activist. I am an activist. And you must carry that with you when you go back to those classrooms in whatever role you have. Because if not, you're betraying the folks who have done civil rights work before us.
So, I don't know about all of you, but I feel incredibly privileged to have been here, to have heard our four wonderful panelists. You've been absolutely spectacular. And thinking about what you've just said about, urban education and education in general being the civil rights issue of the time, couldn't agree more. And it's something we all need to address. And it's in that context, actually, that I'm brought back to the song that the kids sung when they came in. And they said, looking for a miracle, the sky's the limit. I think they're right. And the miracle is in this room, and it's all of us working together towards the cause that the group has talked about. Thank you very, very much. Would you give them all a round of applause?